Today I'll be showing you how to make this chunky finger knit mini whale. The supplies you'll need are chunky blanket yarn. This is jumbo size 7. You can find this at Hobby Lobby, Michael's, JOANN, Walmart. You may even be able to find this on Amazon. This is the white from Hobby Lobby. I am using the Spa Blue from Hobby Lobby. You can use any color of your choice. If you got the DIY kit from me, it will come with this this blue color, and then you'll also need some black yarn for the eyes. You'll need a pair of scissors and some polyfill as well to stuff the whale. This is a beginner-friendly tutorial, so I will be going slowly through each step as I teach you how to make this mini whale. At any point in the video, you can pause, rewind, slow down the video until you get each step along the way. To start, we'll be working with the white yarn. We'll be doing the bottom of the whale first and working our way up towards the top of the whale. To begin, we need to create a slip knot, and we'll be creating the slip knot up here, leaving about 6 to 8 inches of tail yarn. So I'm going to grab my yarn up here, and I am going to do a crisscross over to create a loop. So I want my working yarn at the top of the loop and my tail yarn behind the loop. And then I am going to grab my thumb and my pointer, and I'm going to put it through that loop and grab my working yarn with those two fingers and pull up a loop. And then to tighten, I'm going to take my tail yarn, I'm going to grab my loop up here and pull that tail yarn to tighten it. So here you have your slip knot, and now we need to tighten your slip knot. So to do that, we are going to pull on your working yarn this time. Right now, my loop is about 3 fingers wide. You want it to be about 1.5 inches in length inside the loop. So to make it about 2 fingers wide, I am going to take my working yarn and I'm going to hold here at the knot of my slip knot of the loop, and I'm just going to pull down on my working yarn as I hold at the knot to make it a little bit smaller. So now my loop is about 2 of my fingers wide, and that's about 1.5 inches. So this is my first loop. We are going to chain on a total of 8 loops. So to continue chaining on loops, I'm going to again take my pointer and my thumb, put it through that loop, and I'm just going to hold on to my tail to keep it out of the way with my pinky and my ring finger. And then I'm going to take my working yarn, and with those 2 fingers again, I'm going to grab it and pull up another loop. And then I just like to straighten it out like so. So we are going in a line. Now we are going to continue on to pull up 6 more loops. I have my 2 loops, 1, 2, and now we're going to do 6 more. So again, just put your thumb and your pointer in that last loop that you just did. Take your working yarn and pull up a loop. And then I just straighten it out. So that is my 3rd loop, and I'm just going to continue on until I hit 8 loops total. And I'll go back and show you how to count back your loops. So if you lose count, don't worry. I'll show you how you can count back. Again, thumb and pointer through that last loop that you made. With your working yarn, you're going to take your 2 fingers and pull up another loop with that working yarn. Again, you want to make sure that each of your loops are about 2 fingers wide, about 1.5 inches. You want to make sure that your loops are as even as possible as you continue to move through loop through loop. Okay, so now I'm just going to see where I'm at. I'm going to count my loops back. I am going to take the tops of these loops and count back. So this is the last one I did. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now sometimes it can be hard to see each loop separated, so if you just give it a little tug, you can see where the loops are separated to count a little bit easier. So I'm at 6, that means I have 2 more because I need 8 loops total chained on. 1, 2. So that completes my 8 chains. So we'll go back and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, you can just see I'm pulling slightly so I can see that separation in between loops. Okay, so now that I have my chain, I count my chain as my first row, so this is row 1 complete. We are going to do 3 rows total of this white yarn. So now we need to make this into a circle. To do that, we have our last loop here that we made, where you can see my finger right there poking through, and then we also have our tail yarn over here. So we need to combine them. Take your tail yarn and you're going to just pull it through that last loop, going right through there. So take your tail yarn, push it through that last loop, and then just pull that tail yarn until it reaches where that first loop that we did, where that slip knot is. Now that we've pulled our tail yarn through that last loop that we did, we want to make sure that we're turning our work so our tail yarn and our working yarn are facing away from us rather than towards us like this. So make sure that once you put your tail yarn through that loop, your last loop, to make a circle, that you're keeping your tail yarn and working yarn away from you. So again, this is our first row. We need to add on 2 more rows. The second row is the trickiest part, so feel free to pause this video, stop it, rewind it, slow it down, and rewatch as many times as you need until you get this step down, or even the first row, the chain row. At any point in this video, feel free to pause, slow down, and rewind the video until you get each step down. Okay, so we're going to take a look at where our working yarn is, which is right here through this loop right here, and we are going to go 1 loop over, working in a clockwise direction, or 1 down from where the loop is. I'm going to put my finger through that top of that loop here so I know where I'm going. I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to pull up another loop through this one right here. So with my finger, I'm just going to grab onto this working yarn with that finger, and I am going to pull up a loop. So we've got our first loop in on the second row, and then we're just going to keep going. So I've pulled up a loop through this one here. We're going to go 1 over or 1 down, going in clockwise direction. Put the finger through the next one so I know where I need to go. Take my working yarn and I am going to pull up another loop through there. Okay, and then we're just going to continue going around in the circle and continue pulling up loops until we have 8 total. So again, I'm going to put my finger through there so I know where I need to go next. Take my working yarn, and with this finger I'm going to pull up another loop. Now as you continue this and go around in a circle, you're going to notice that your circle is going to be flipping inside out like this. That's perfect. That's what we want it to do. You can leave it flipped inside out. It will do it naturally as you put each loop through. Just continue to go on to the next loop over and pull up a loop. Next one down, pull up a loop through, and you're going to keep doing this until you hit where that tail yarn is. So we're just going to continue going around in a clockwise direction, and our circle is going to be flipping inside out. So now the tail yarn is at the top of your work rather than hanging down from the bottom. At this point, we are now at the slip knot, which is probably very hard to see on the camera, but this slip knot is right here. It might look like another loop, but if you just feel right here, you'll be able to tell right away that it is the slip knot because you can't get your finger through there to pull up another loop. So it's also right next to where the tail yarn is, and I'm going to show you what to do with the tail yarn next. So your tail yarn is facing up, we want it facing down. It's facing up because your circle was flipping inside out or flipping upside down, however you want to say it. You want to take this tail yarn and you want to poke it through the center of that circle there so it's now facing back down. So take your tail yarn and through the circle right there, just place it down there and you can just pull it so it's facing down. So I have my slip knot here. I'm going to move over to the next actual loop, which is right here, and it's where that tail yarn is sticking through. So just leave your tail yarn there. We need the tail yarn there. Put your finger through that next loop, also where the tail yarn is. Take your working yarn and pull it on up. And then I'm just going to pull on the tail yarn and pull on this loop that I just made to straighten out the circle. And then your last loop, so far all of your loops have been facing in the same direction, going in the direction of the circle. This last loop is a little bit different because it's facing inward rather than side to side. So you're just going to put your finger through this loop, just give it a little twist so it's going in the same direction now as all the other loops, and pull up the loop with your working yarn through that one. So now at this point you can count how many loops you have. You should have 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is our completed second row. Now we're going to continue on in a circle going in the same direction, and we're going to just pull up loops through each of these loops that we just pulled up. We're just going to go one over from where we pulled up our last loop into this one, and we are going to pull up loops with our working yarn again. So when you go to pull up your loops, make sure that you're grabbing as close to that last loop as possible rather than from over here. So when you pull up a loop with this finger, make sure you're grabbing as close to this last loop, like so, rather than pulling from over here. If you pull over there, it creates a lot of slack and extra yarn is going to peek through and create bigger holes. By pulling over here, it keeps your work nice and tight and you'll have a tight knit stuffy rather than a very loose and big stuffy. Okay, so keep pulling up loops. This is our last row of white before we switch over to the blue. So this is our third row. Again, put that finger through that next loop over from your working yarn. With that finger, grab as close as you can to that last loop and pull up that yarn using your working yarn. And again, feel free to slow the video down, pause and rewind as many times as you need to so you can practice each step and get each step down. Okay, so at this point you are lined back up with the tail yarn, which is great. Once you're lined up with the tail yarn, you know that you need to go one more loop over to complete your row. So I'm just going to go one more over to complete my third row. And then I'm going to show you how to count down if you've lost count of how many rows you're on. Okay, so to count backwards, all you need to do is take your last loop that you made and then count going backwards. So 1, 2, 3. 3 rows, and then if you're confused by going one more row over from the tail, if you just make sure that you have 3 on all sides, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you know that you have completed a row. So again, if you just give it a little pull, you'll be able to see the separation from the rows. Now we just need to change colors that we have completed our third row of white. So I'm going to take my blue yarn here, or what you can take whatever color that you want to use. So I'm going to take my blue yarn and I am going to attach it. So to do that, I am going to just tie a double knot at the base of my working yarn here that is on the inside of the whale, so behind this last loop that we've made. So to tie a knot, it's just your regular double knot. So one tie, and then I'm just going to pull on my blue yarn here to make it snug against that last loop, behind the last loop on the inside of the whale. And then again, I'm just going to do one more tie to make it a double knot. So I'm going to pull to make sure the knot is snug, but then I'm also going to take my blue working yarn and just hold all the white on the whale and pull it in the opposite direction as well to make sure that it's nice and snug. So now I'm just going to take my scissors. I'm going to cut off this little piece of blue. I'm not going to cut super close to the knot. That way it can account for any slippage of the knot and the knot doesn't come undone. And then I also can cut off the white piece of yarn since we're done with that. Just going to take off the extra fluff so it's not getting all over our project. Okay, so I've attached my blue piece of yarn. I'm going to pull up this loop a little bit to make sure that the knot is snug right behind it. And then I'm going to continue, again going in clockwise direction all the way around as I work with my blue yarn now. So I'm going to do 5 rows total with this blue yarn. So again, I'm just going to go next loop over with this loop and with my finger through that next loop. And I'm going to go right next to this knot and pull up a loop. Just make sure that your knot stays behind the whale and it doesn't pull through that loop so it's on the other side of the whale. Make sure it's on the inside of the whale. Okay, so there's my first loop and I'm just going to go all the way around, keep pulling up loops until we hit 5 rows. Here's a reminder to make sure that you are pulling up your loops as close to that last loop as possible by pulling from here rather than from over here. Also make sure that your loops are about 2 fingers wide or about 1.5 inches or so. And make sure that you're doing that for every loop that you do. The more you do this, the more you'll get into the rhythm of doing it, and the easier it will become to pull up the same sized loops. So we're at the knot again, and we have one blue on either side, so at this point we know that we've completed the row, or of course you can look at the tail yarn. If you go straight across, here is where that loop is, down aligned with the tail. If you go one over, you know that you've completed the row. So now that we are at the knot, we again need to make sure that we are just pulling up our next loop super close to that last loop so our knot doesn't push through onto the outside of the whale. So just continue pulling up loops. Feel free to pause the video if you need to work on any of the steps before moving forward. So I'm just going to keep going, and I would like to encourage you If this is your first ever finger knit project, it can take a while to learn how to finger knit. So here's your encouragement to keep going and keep practicing. Reach out to me. There's an email provided when you purchase this video or DIY kit. If you need help at any point, you can always send me an email, and I am more than happy to help you out, and I will give you any pointers that I can. But yeah, the more that you do it, the more you will get into the rhythm of finger knitting and pulling up these loops, especially pulling them up at the same size. Okay, so I'm almost done here with my 5th row. Okay, so I'm aligned here with my tail yarn, and I'm just going to go one over, which I've already put that through, and I know that I've completed the row. So if you lost count on how many rows you're on, just count back on all of your blues. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've completed my 5th row for the whale, and now I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut, leaving about 6 to 8 inches or so of this blue yarn, which we will use later to close up the top of the whale. Just taking this extra fluff and putting it off to the side. Okay, so we've completed the body of the whale, and now we're going to move on to making the tail and fins for the whale. Okay, so the first thing we're going to work on are the fins. We are going to cut 2 pieces that are about 8 inches in length, 6 to 8 inches. So I've cut my 2 pieces, and then I am just going to take off that extra fluff left over from cutting with the scissors and put it to the side. Okay, so this is probably the easiest part of making the mini whale. Again, we're working on the fins, so we are working on these for the whale. Okay, so to do that, all you're going to do is tie a triple knot at the center of this piece of yarn. So you're just going to tie a knot, pull it through, and tie another knot right on top of that last knot. So here it has 2 knots right on top of each other, and we are just going to tie one more knot again right on top of the other 2. Okay, so here is your first fin. That's all you have to do for that for now. And you're just going to take your other piece of yarn and again tie a triple knot right at the center of that piece of yarn. So that's one, second one right on top of each other, and a third one again. Okay, so you have your 2 fins completed, and now we are going to go over the tail. Okay, so we're going to cut about 12 inches this time for the tail yarn, or for the tail piece. Just going to remove that excess yarn. And basically all we're going to do is we are going to create a triple knot, again just like we did with the fins, but we're going to do them right next to each other on one piece of yarn. So it looks like that. So I'm going to start on the one side of the yarn and just create a knot. So there's my first one. And I am just going to do 2 more of those. One and another one for the third knot. Okay, so there is my first triple knot, which looks just like the fins, but I'm going to add a second triple knot right next to this one. So I'm going to take my longer side now. I'm just going to create a loop right next to that last triple knot that I made, and then I'm going to pull my yarn through that. This is simply just the same thing I was doing before, but now we're just trying to get it as close as we can to that last triple knot. So here's my knot here. Before I tighten it, I'm just going to take my hands here and try to slide it over next to this knot as I pull. And okay, so there's my first knot right next to this triple knot, and now I'm going to do that 2 more times. So again, I'm just creating a loop here. My knot is right here, so I'm creating another knot around that last knot that I did. Okay, and I am just pulling it close by using these fingers to guide it over to this knot here. Okay, there was my second one, and now I'm going to do a third one. Okay, again, just sliding it over. Okay, so there is my triple knot, 2 of them right next to each other, and then I'm just going to cut off the excess here. Okay, so I have my tail and my 2 fins, and now I'm going to attach them to the whale body. I'm first going to attach the tail, so I'm going to pick up my tail, and then I'm going to find where my working yarn was and my tail yarn, and I'm going to work on the back side of the whale. So I'm going to find where my knot is on the back of my whale, where we changed colors, the blue and the white. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but the knot is right here. You should be able to see it easily when you look inside of your whale. But we are just going to put the tail pretty much right in between where the knot is. So if you look at the whale's body here, you can see that it has, these are the knit rows. It makes a little bit of a V shape. And then you have the dips in between the rows. So you have the rows, dip, row, dip, row. So I am going to go in between one row inside of the dips, so right next to the row. I am going to go right in line with where the knot is. My knot is right here behind the whale. I'm going to find where I have the white and the blue. I'm going to go right in between there. And then on the other side, I'm going to find the white and the blue, and I'm going to go right in between there. So I'm going right in between the row again and in the indents between the row. So I'm going to take either side of the tail. Each piece of yarn is going to go right where my 2 fingers are inside of the whale. So go ahead and poke it through and pull it in. Go ahead and pull it in. And it may have looked a little bit uneven, which is perfectly fine. Once you close this up, it will even out, and then you can always adjust and fix the tail as necessary. So once you have your tail in, if you go on the inside of the whale, you will see your 2 pieces of yarn that you just put through. You're going to take those 2 pieces and just do a triple knot on the inside of the whale to secure your tail in place. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so my tail is secure and in place, and now I am going to put the fins in. The placement of the tail isn't as much of a big deal as it is with the fins. So if you put it on the front side of the whale and as opposed to the back side where I have it, where my tail and working yarn are. As long as you put your fins in the right place compared to where your tail is, then you should be good to go. Okay, so I'm going to work on placing the fins in. So I have my tail placed, wrapped around this one row, and now I'm going to go and work on the one side for the fin. It doesn't matter which side you do first. I am going to go, so I have my indent here where my tail is placed, then I have a row, and then I have another dip or indent here. I'm going to go put my first piece of yarn for the fin right at that indent or dip, and I have my white and my blue. It's going to go right in between there. I'm going to put my first one in there, and then instead of going all the way over to the next indent, I'm going to go right in between the row, and I am going to put it again in between the white and blue, and I'm going to put that next piece of yarn through there. Okay, so I have my one fin on, and now I'm just going to do the other side. So again, I have my dip or indent for where I put my tail. Here's my row. I'm going to go to the next indent over, again between the white and blue. Put my one piece of yarn through that one, and then with the next piece of yarn for the fin, I am going to go in between or in the middle of my row here, this row, again between the white and the blue, and place that yarn through. Okay, so I have my fins in place. I always like to put them both in before tying it off to make sure that they're in the correct spot, which I always just eyeball. And then I am going to tie them in like I tied the tail in. So I'm going to make sure that I have the two pieces that are attached to this one fin, and I'm just going to do a triple knot like I did with the tail, and I'm just going to go in this way. It's a little bit easier for me to do. Once you do this triple knot, you're just going to do the same thing on the other side with the other fin. Okay, so here is my other fin. Here are the two pieces of yarn that are attached to this piece or this fin, and I'm just going to do a triple knot to secure it. Okay, and one more knot. I always like to do a triple knot to just make sure that it's extra secure and not going to go anywhere. Okay, so I have my two fins, which is a little bit hard to see right now because the eyes aren't in and then we haven't stuffed it yet. But once we stuff it, they will poke out a little bit more. Okay, so now that I have my fin and tail in, fins and tail in, I'm going to do the eyes. So to do the eyes, I'm going to cut about 6 to 8 inch pieces of yarn, and I'm just going to take off that extra fluff and put it off to the side so we don't have to worry about it getting all over the place. I'm going to take my one piece of yarn and I'm simply just going to tie one knot at the center of the yarn, and that creates the eye. Okay, so there's one knot, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece of yarn. Go ahead and just tie a knot. Okay, so now that I have my two eyes, I just need to put them in the whale. So here's my tail, here are my fins, and I'm just going to put them, the eyes, here and here. So my fin is right here, the one piece of yarn is in between the one row. I'm going to go in the indent, next one over, and for the first piece of yarn for my eye, I'm going to go in between the white and blue. And this time, instead of going over this way horizontally, I'm going to be working vertically, and I'm going to go up one blue. So here is a blue piece of yarn. I am just going to put my next strand of yarn up and over and pull that through. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So here is my fin. The one piece of yarn is in between this row here. I need to go in the indent between these rows, find between the white and the blue, put my first piece of yarn through, pull it until I hit that knot where the eye is, and then I am going to go up vertically one blue over and push that piece of yarn through, and there I have my eyes. But now I need to do a triple knot with these strands of yarn back here. So same thing as the fins, you're just tying a triple knot. Make sure you're pulling your pieces of yarn as evenly as possible, that way your eye doesn't accidentally slip into the back of the whale. Just go ahead and do a triple knot, and then once you're done with this one, you're just going to do the same thing for the other eye. So there's my first eye. Again, taking your two pieces of yarn that are attached to this one and do a triple knot. Make sure you pull as evenly as possible. Okay, so I have one done, and I'm just going to do two more knots. Okay, so now that I have my eyes in, I am just going to close up the bottom before doing the polyfill. So here is my tail yarn, and here are all of these loops at the bottom of the whale. We're going to be using our tail yarn and weaving in and out through these loops to close it up. So I am working again clockwise. I'm going to take my tail yarn, the top of it, and I'm going to find that first loop over from it to the right of it. So if you pull on this slightly, you'll see that this tail yarn is attached to this first loop here. We want to go one over to this loop. So I'm going to be pulling the yarn from the outside of the whale towards the inside of the whale through this loop. So here's my tail yarn. I am just going to push it through and then slide it. And I'm just going to take my hands here around that loop that I just pulled the tail yarn through, hold on to it a little bit, and pull. So each time we go through a loop, we're just going to pull it slightly to get it nice and snug close together. So again, going from the outside of the whale to the inside of the whale, the next loop over, and pull it through, tighten, again, pull it through, and tighten. And we're just going to go all the way around until the bottom of the whale is closed up. So here's my last one. Just pull that through, same thing. Okay, so now that I have completed closing it all up, I'm going to push this tail yarn through the center of the hole that we just closed up. But before we do that, we need to create a knot right at the base of this piece of yarn. So I've created the knot here at the base of the yarn, and now I'm going to find the center of the hole that we just closed up, which is right here for me. I'm going to take the top of that tail yarn, and I'm just going to push it through, continue to push it through, and even push that knot through that we just made. Okay, so we've closed up the bottom of our whale, and now we are going to stuff the top of it with some polyfill. Okay, so I'm just going to grab some polyfill and just stuff it in there, making sure that I am pushing on all of the edges to make sure that the polyfill is really making its way down to the bottom of the whale. And then I'm just going to grab some more. Again, just pushing around on the edges to make sure that the polyfill really goes all throughout the whale. Okay, so I have my polyfill in the whale, and now I just need to close up the top of the whale. Okay, so to close up the top, I'm going to take this piece of yarn here that was my working yarn, and instead of working in a clockwise direction, we are now working in counterclockwise direction, working to the left. So I'm going to take my yarn here, and also this time we're going to be working from the inside of the whale towards the outside of the whale. So I'm going to take my piece of yarn, I'm going to push it through this loop here where my finger is through. So take your yarn, push it through, going towards the outside of the whale, and give it a little tighten, but don't tighten it too tightly to where this loop pops out. If that loop pops out, you can just put that piece of yarn through there again to create that loop back. But we're just going to continue to go around, working to the left, counterclockwise direction this time, and continue putting that piece of yarn through all of your loops, going from the inside of the whale to the outside. Once you do 2 or 3, you can always put your thumb into the last loop here, your thumb or any finger, and hold it there, that way it doesn't slip out, and then just give a slight pull to tighten it. Don't pull too hard because we don't want your yarn to snap. So if you're having trouble tightening it, work from each loop to individually try to pull them tighter instead of doing one big pull. And just keep going around. If your yarn does snap, just tie a piece of yarn back onto it, just like we did when we were changing the colors. Just tie a knot, a double knot, and then you can continue going. So as you are tightening, you'll see that this loop gets pretty small. So just don't lose track of this last loop here. So I have 2 more. Tighten, and then here's my last loop to go through. Okay, so here is the top of my whale, and now I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the bottom. I'm going to create a knot at the base of this piece of yarn. Okay, so there's my knot, and then again we're going to find the center of the circle that we just closed up, which is right here for me. And then I'm going to take my piece of yarn and just push it through the center of that hole. Here's the knot. Also push that knot through the center. Now if you wanted to, you can try to make this hole at the top, because I know the whale has that little spout at the top, so just a little added extra feature to the whale. Alright, so here is your completed mini whale. So you can, the bottom for me, usually when I close it up, it looks a little bit clumpy and uneven. You can just go in, and I'm just going to push right here to just even out the bottom. And then same thing with the fin and tail. You can always adjust them to how you would like your whale to look. Okay, so here is the finished mini whale. Okay, here's just a reminder, if you're having trouble with any specific part of the whale, you can send me an email and I'll be happy to give you pointers and help in any way that I can. I love to be able to help and teach how to make these finger knit whales or any of my stuffies, so do not hesitate to reach out if you're just looking for a little bit of extra help and guidance on how to make this mini whale. Here's also a reminder that if you're a beginner, it's okay if it takes a number of times and tries before you're able to get this down. It's definitely a learning curve, even if you've crocheted or finger knit, even finger knitted a different way than I finger knit before. So here's just an encouragement to keep going and keep trying. And again, reach out to me if you need any help at any point. I would love to help you so that you can accomplish your mini Willie the Whale. Thanks so much. Send me your pictures. I'd love to see them on Instagram, or send me an email with your pictures of your completed mini Willie the Whale. I always love to see it. Thanks so much for watching and joining me on this tutorial.